Stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Amidst all the sound and fury since 9 o'clock this morning when the Privileges Committee report came out, and yes, it was pretty damning of Boris Johnson, and people have taken sides in a normal tribal way, but let's get to the absolute crux of it. Do you think Boris Johnson knowingly misled Parliament? Because that's what it's all about. We'll also look at soaring interest rates. Rates now higher than they were after the Truss Kwarteng mini-budget. I dare to ask, could Liz Truss actually have been right? And trophy hunting, yes, Parliament is debating right now legislation that would ban all forms of trophy hunting. But we ask, is that good or bad for conservation in Africa? All of that and much more after the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Well, the main news this evening from GB News is that hundreds of people have been gathering in the city centre of Nottingham to pay their respects this evening to the 3 victims of Tuesday's knife attacks. The city fell silent at 6 o'clock to pay tribute to 19-year-old students Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber, and 65-year-old school caretaker Ian Coates. And earlier, the Home Secretary paid tribute to them by laying a wreath outside Nottingham Council House. Speaking at the vigil, the sons of Ian Coates thanked those who spoke warmly and lovingly of their father.
It feels like he's touched a lot of hearts over the years, more than what we assumed and knew that he had. So it's been really nice and heartwarming to see the messages and the people come out and talk about how he was when they were younger and how he's helped them. Some beautiful comments.
Barnaby Webber's mum, Emma Webber, says Nottingham had a special place in her son's heart and she asked people to hold no hate. And Grace Kumar's mum, Sinead, fought back tears as she delivered a speech to the crowd in Nottingham as well. Meanwhile, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Nottingham, Professor Shira West, said it will take a long time for the community to heal.
The people of Nottingham know that this is not what our city is about, and we will not let this single horrifying event define who we are and what we stand for. Our communities are united in grief, but we will draw upon the enormous strength of every one of us as citizens and our pride in our city as we come together to recover and start the long journey to heal.
Well, in news events away from Nottingham today, Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of the inquiry looking into Partygate, which has reported that the former Prime Minister deliberately misled Parliament. The report says the former Prime Minister was guilty of serious contempt and was complicit in a campaign attempting to abuse and intimidate the committee. Mr Johnson describes the findings as a deranged conclusion and accused the inquiry itself of hypocrisy. The former Prime Minister would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days had he not quit as an MP. MPs will be debating the report into his conduct on Monday. And lastly, all 3 Britons who died after a dive boat caught fire off Egypt have been named today. Stephen Hill and Paul Darling were taking part in scuba diving lessons when the vessel burst into flames on Sunday. And yesterday it was announced 58-year-old Christina Quinn, who was chief executive of a hospice in Plymouth, was also killed in the boat fire. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News.
It finally arrived. Yes, at 9 o'clock this morning, the 30,000 words came out from the Privileges Committee. Yes, it was as much, really, as a small book. And it was absolutely unequivocal in saying that they believe that committee, by the way, a majority of whom were actually Conservative members of Parliament, they believe that he did knowingly mislead Parliament. In fact, the word mislead appeared 93 times amongst those 30,000 words. Its conclusions, to say that he would have been recommended for a ban of 90 days had he stayed as an MP, something which MPs will still vote on next Monday, and then to remove his House of Commons pass, I thought looked petty at best, vindictive and nasty at worst. That was, I think, wholly unnecessary and nasty. And there was an element, I thought today, of Remainer revenge. People being absolutely delighted that the man at the top associated with us leaving the European Union a couple of years ago, that he'd finally been toppled. But I think amidst all the sound and fury, and people saying, you know, it's been a kangaroo court, and others saying that Boris, you know, really didn't behave as a PM should. I think most of the debate today has missed the key point, because it is, did he knowingly mislead Parliament? And my views on this have been absolutely consistent. Have a look at this clip from May the 24th, 2022, when I was in the studio with MP Peter Bone.
I don't think Boris Johnson has a good relationship with the truth. I think he did mislead the House of Commons. I genuinely do.
But do you think he deliberately misled the Commons? I don't. I don't.
I think he's got away with not telling the truth in every job he's done for decades.
I just don't believe he deliberately misled. The Privileges Committee will
Would you trust Boris Johnson with your last fiver?
I'd trust Boris Johnson with the government of the country.
Well, Peter Bone said he'd trust the judgment of the Privileges Committee, and they've been perfectly clear, all of them. They believe that he did knowingly mislead Parliament. And how could he not have known that Wine Time Fridays and other things were going on in Number 10? I'm sad that it's come to this. I'm sad for him. I'm sad also for Brexit that this has happened, because I can see already articles in The Guardian suggesting, well, now that Boris has gone, we can reverse Brexit. But did he mislead Parliament? Give me your view, Farage at gbnews.com, because I'm afraid I do believe that he did. David Maddox is a political editor of The Express Online. Well, the committee were pretty clear, weren't they?
They were pretty clear, but to go back on your point, I'm not entirely convinced. So it's clear that he did mislead Parliament, and he's fessed up to that. I'm not convinced that he deliberately misled Parliament. A lot of people aren't, and but I think, unfortunately, that it's gone well beyond that. And there has been an ongoing campaign, you've referred to it in terms of the Brexit legacy. There's been an ongoing campaign since 2016 to portray Boris as a habitual liar. They finally got the document, they could do it. I mean, I saw this morning Dominic Grieve, Michael Heseltine, all the usual suspects were all out waving there saying, I told you so.
Why did Boris give them all this ammunition?
Well,
all self-imposed errors.
It's the enigma that is Boris, isn't it? That, you know, it's the flaws in his personality which were there, and you know perfectly well that I wasn't a great fan of his government and him as Prime Minister. I thought that it was a huge missed opportunity. I mean, basically, he got one thing right, which was to get Brexit done. But it was, and I thought Philip Davis, your GB News colleague and Tory MP, really nailed it yesterday at PMQs when he said that. But it's, you know, for me, I'm afraid it's gone well beyond whether he misled Parliament deliberately or not. This is now about the legacy of Brexit and about unpicking it and saying it was all based on a lie, and we're going to get a deluge of this from the left and from the Remainers.
Boris being out of the game makes it easier for the rejoiners.
It does, but it also makes it easier for him to make a comeback. And to
What, within the Tory party?
Within the Tory party, I think it will.
Well, not this side of an election. Surely.
Not this side of an election,
no, okay.
but in 4 or 5 years' time, I could easily see it. It's amazing. I mean, you see it around the Western world. I mean, I don't really want to compare him to Silvio Berlusconi, but my wife's Italian. You know, the number of times that man, for much worse things, made the most remarkable comebacks, and people say, "Oh, it's Italy." Well, but you know, Italy's a serious Western democracy, and we keep voting this man back in
4 times.
4 times. It's these big personality politicians.
Well, and of course, Churchill had some disastrous periods during his career, and bounced and came back, and U-turned on many of the things he believed in, and
your friend over the Atlantic, I think, is on the point of making a comeback as well, partly fuelled by the allegations being made against him and the weaponising of the legal system, as we've seen the weaponising of the parliamentary procedures.
Yeah, the difference is that the Trump base has held solid.
Yes.
And much of the Johnson 2019 vote, you know, maybe up to 40% of that vote doesn't really trust him anymore.
I think it could come back. I actually think it could come back, especially after a bit of a Labour government and things continuing to go badly.
David, I tell you what, I was hearing nonsense this time. You know, a few days ago, would he fight the Mid-Beds by-election? No. Would he go for Henley at the next election? The Conservative Party will never let him back for what he's done this side of an election, but 3 or 4 years down the road, he could be back in politics.
Absolutely.
And I think that is quite possibly true. David Maddox, thank you for joining me. Now, I mentioned The Guardian earlier on, and this column, it was very, very clear what Martin Kettle was saying in this column. He was absolutely clear that he saw Boris disappearing as really one of the biggest obstacles there could possibly be. Brexit was Johnson and Johnson was Brexit. Now he has gone, Britain must think again. And we are going to get an absolute deluge of this, quite rightly, as David Maddox said. Now, Brendan Clark-Smith is Member of Parliament, Conservative Member of Parliament, a red waller from Bassetlaw. And it was Brexit and Boris and Corbyn, many other factors that got you to win that seat. How do you feel today about Boris?
Well, Boris, a huge amount of respect for him. And as you say, we achieved some very great things there. And myself personally, I've seen some fantastic things that I never thought we'd actually manage to achieve. And there was a lot more that we wanted to do. And the reports come out today. I'm very, very disappointed in what I've read. I think the committee
Disappointed because that it does actually say quite conclusively that Boris did knowingly mislead Parliament, or are you disappointed because you think the 7 of them are wrong?
Disappointed with what I think is the lack of evidence, the massive overreach, and what I see as very vindictive and spiteful, actually. I think, and you mentioned about the pass earlier. Nigel, you understand as much as anybody the number of times people have tried to stitch you up in Brussels.
By the way, I'm not allowed to join the former MEPs Association, so I know what it's like to be cast out.
Exactly, and these kind of things are unnecessary, and I think it goes further. And whatever you think about Boris Johnson, a lot of people have said today that actually it goes a little bit further than it should do, even if you did think he was guilty of it, which I don't. But at the same time, again, no, I don't. But the 90 days...
You really... you know, I mean, we all know that through the years, Boris's relationship with the truth has been pretty relaxed. Pretty relaxed. You know, you speak to anybody in journalism, anybody who was at Eton with him, anyone who was at Oxford with him. You know, he's always... it's always been sort of a bit like Prince Harry. It's always been his truth. But what's done is done, isn't it? There's no going back from this, and Boris can scream and shout all that he likes. But do you... I mean, David Maddox thinks this is a figure that could come back in some form in a few years' time.
I'd never write him off, and of course he's left Parliament before, went away to become London Mayor and then came back again. So Boris Johnson's one of these great titans of British politics, of global politics really as well. So certainly as a character in the Conservative Party, he's a great person to have out campaigning there. He wants us to win the next election. He's been very clear about that. And I think what we really need to do is we need to separate this as a party issue to what is really one of a committee, and it's an issue with the House here. So I think we're all very keen to do that. But again, for me, this 90 days, again, that's been extended from what I gather and from the latest leak that's come out from that.
Unnecessary.
And that's the thing, backbenchers.
No, I get all of that. I get all of that, Brendan, and we can agree to disagree. I think he did mislead the House, and I said it at the time, but hey. But here's the point. You know, Boris stood for Brexit, helped get it over the line for us to leave, and then has disappointed many, many people, including Brexiteers in your constituency, people who'd been Labour voters for many, many years, who in the end voted for you. In 2019, they genuinely thought the numbers coming into Britain would go down. They're going through the roof. Those running their own little businesses genuinely expected regulations to be eased. They haven't. I mean, let's face it. The Tories have made a right mess of Brexit, haven't they?
Well, I think the issue with Brexit, isn't it, Nigel, whichever side of the political spectrum you stood in, and there are many people, even Labour leave and so on, you had those leavers across the spectrum, but Brexit gave you the opportunity to shape Britain in the way you wanted it. So I think once we did Brexit, some people want a much more deregulation, a smaller state, a more free market approach. Some look towards more protectionism or your various industries. So it's up to us to make a good job of that. I think we can use COVID as part of an excuse, I think, because it's a very difficult time for our economy, but you can't use that forever. And we need to actually make more.
Come on. You know, and I've campaigned in your constituency, you know, you and I both know a significant number of people in Bassetlaw voted in that referendum, voted Conservative in 2019 because they wanted the numbers coming into Britain to be reduced. They have been let down.
Well, absolutely about the numbers. I know we focus a lot on the small boats, and of course that's terrible. We need to do something about that immediately from a fairness point of view. But of course it's those net migration figures that we look at, which are far, far more now. We looked at student visas and of course bringing a lot of family members over. That's particularly a problem now. Suella Braverman has been acting on that. You see all of the nasty remarks towards her, and that's somebody else again. There's been this constant campaign from the establishment against people who want to fight for these kind of things.
I get that.
So I would say Boris Johnson has been a victim of that as well. OK, we can talk about reports and Partygate and other things, but this has been going back many years. It was about wallpaper before that, and of course many people never forgive him for Brexit.
I know, I get that, which is what angers me, is why he's given so much ammunition to his enemies. A final thought, if I can. Rishi made 5 big pledges. At the minute, all 5 are failing, aren't they?
Well, he's getting there, I think. With inflation, that's coming down. The backlog is coming down as well. Small boats, there's lots of plans that are there. The Rwanda scheme as well. And we're hoping to get the legislation through to actually do something about that. So I think give him a bit of a chance. Rome wasn't built in a day, but we don't have that much time because the election's coming up and we want to win it, of course.
I'll try and give him a bit of a chance, I promise. Thank you very much indeed. In a moment, we're going to get a very, very different view. Paul Connew is going to join me, former editor of the Sunday Mirror and a biographer on Boris. More Boris in just a moment.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, as ever, a debate about Boris Johnson raises some really very strong feelings. I asked you, did he mislead Parliament? Nick says, of course he misled Parliament. Boris has been shady with the truth, but this time it's come back like a boomerang. I'm sure he can build back better his career in journalism, though. Well, whether it's journalism, giving speeches, I'm sure he won't struggle. Ryan says, whilst I find Boris to be an amusing character, I do have to agree that he misled Parliament. Whether this was intentional is another question. I'm not yet certain, much the position that David Maddox came up with. Elliot says, absolutely not. He was Prime Minister and working long hours in Number 10 through the pandemic. I'd fully expect a different rule for those guys. They were colleagues in a unique workplace and in a unique situation. To conflate this with partying while the rest of us solemnly observe the rules is crazy. Well, Elliot, all I will say to you is this, that on day one of being an MEP back in 1999, one thing was made very clear to me. I could protest as loudly as I wanted, but it would be very unwise of me, as somebody who was now a lawmaker, to be a lawbreaker. And actually, I think that was pretty good advice. And again, Elliot, with respect, you're missing the point. This isn't about partying. It's about whether he knowingly misled Parliament. Now, you've heard those already on this show tonight who support Boris Johnson strongly. Well, one man who doesn't is Paul Carnew, former editor of the Sunday Mirror and author of Boris Johnson, Media Creation, Media Clown, Media Casualty. Paul...
Co-author, Nigel. I had fellow distinguished authors.
Well, when promotion's offered, just take it. You know. Paul, in the sense he's not a media casualty, he's sort of almost a truth casualty, isn't he?
He's been found guilty as charged. The narcissist charlatan has been caught out and finally found guilty.
You really dislike him, don't you?
I think he's a proven liar for so many years, and you know, and whether you're a Remainer or a Leaver, he has failed over Brexit, either through cynical lying or because he didn't even understand the complexities of Brexit. That is the problem. And I think he has been found out.
There is
finally
a point.
Found out.
There is a point here, actually, isn't there? If you take the emotion out of it. It's very interesting. When Americans look at what's going on, they say, well, how can this happen? I mean, how can somebody be removed from office for lying? I mean, if this happened in Washington, there'd be no one left. And I thought, actually, if you take the emotion out of it, the fact that a Prime Minister has been found to have misled Parliament and therefore is out of politics kind of almost shows our system works, doesn't it?
In a way, it does. And what struck me about some of Boris's language, I almost think he and Trump are morphing into each other. It's almost like Boris has borrowed from the Trump playbook.
You mean his attack back today?
Well, he is mocking and deriding, and these. In Trump's case, it's the judicial system. In Boris's case, it's the parliamentary system. But it is a contempt, for propriety, and Boris has always had contempt for propriety.
And yet, he was the Conservative leader. He made a big call on Brexit, rightly or wrongly. He backed the Brexit decision in the referendum. He led the Conservatives to a very, very big majority, their biggest in, over 35 years. I mean, he still has quite a place in the history books, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. Whether it's a place of fame or infamy is an argument. But you and I have long disagreed on Brexit, even though I'm a Leaver who did predict Leave winning the referendum after my own Red Wall research, as you know.
Yeah.
But we know, and I know from people who know Boris well, he wasn't really a Brexiteer at heart or by conviction. Boris saw going for Brexit as the passport to his sense of entitlement to be Tory leader and Prime Minister. That and
well, you could argue
people close to him.
You could argue that's good political judgment. You could argue it's cynical too.
Yeah, cynical and opportunistic.
But it works.
Yeah, but it worked.
And I'm grateful to him because he helped us get it over the line. Paul, I talked earlier on about the Martin Kettle piece in The Guardian. Yep. I talked about elements of Remainer revenge, and there was some of that today. And surely even you would agree, removing his parliamentary pass was pretty vindictive.
Well, that's the one part of today that surprised me. I thought the 90-day, although, frankly, it's academic as he resigned as an MP, which was in itself an act of cowardice. He could have gone to Parliament and argued his case. He chose not to. That, I think, was cowardly. And, of course, we haven't, as far as I know, yet seen Boris, apart from out jogging, actually facing questions, appearing on camera.
No, we haven't, and I'm not sure that we will in the short term. But, final thought, Paul, and an important one. With Boris gone, does that make the campaign within Parliament and within quite large elements of the London-based media, does it make their campaign to overturn Brexit more powerful?
Arguably, yes. I mean, in the short term, I don't favour a second referendum, but I do think we need to build closer relationships. And on that respect, I mean, the one thing about Sunak is that he isn't Boris Johnson, he isn't Liz Truss. And I think he has a pragmatist's approach. We do need to build better relations with the EU because Brexit isn't working, as we're seeing from the impact economically and in the labour market.
We've not had good relations with many of those European countries for about 1,000 years.
True, but the EU, our relationship there worked. It had its problems, but it worked. And as I said before, whether you're a Leaver or a Remainer, Boris has failed you.
Well, there is considerable disappointment. Paul, thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, there we are. That's GB News. You see, you hear both sides of the argument, both put with passion. I have to say, my conclusion from all of this is just what a terrible, terrible waste. An 80-seat majority, the chance to get Brexit over the line, a country that was really hoping and believing that Brexit would lead to a new, fresh, different kind of politics. And it's all been the most terrible, terrible disappointment. Disappointment for him on a personal level, for me as a Leaver, and for the country as a whole. Now, Liz Truss may have only been Prime Minister for 49 days, but can you believe that interest rates are now higher than they were in the wake of her and Kwasi's mini-budget? We were told they had all the policies wrong. In a moment, I'm joined by Liam Halligan, and I dare to ask, could it be that Liz Truss was actually on the right track?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Think back to last autumn. It was the mini-budget, wasn't it? Kwasi Kwarteng, of course, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, and they wanted to reduce the size of the state. Can you believe it? They wanted to cut taxes. Well, this would never do. Good Lord, no. The International Monetary Fund hit out. The White House, Biden's White House, hit out. Newspaper headlines everywhere talking about rising interest rates, catastrophe for people with mortgages. Truss had crashed the economy. It was a disaster. Kwarteng had to go, and then, of course, in turn, Truss went as well. But that's OK, because then the grown-ups were back in the room. It was all going to be fine. Well, I saw a piece in today's Daily Telegraph that I thought was rather interesting. Alistair Heath wrote an article. There's a mortgage catastrophe coming, and it will prove Liz Truss was right. Well, this is very unconventional thinking. Is it not, Liam Halligan, GB News' economics and business editor? So we've, as I say, the grown-ups took over, but nothing they've done is working, is it?
Now we've got higher government borrowing costs than we had at the time of the Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng budget, even though Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were trying to cut taxes, or perhaps because they were trying to cut taxes and their policies were designed to bolster growth. Look, this is where high finance meets low politics, isn't it? The kind of stuff that we're talking about now. It needs to be unpacked a little bit. So what's actually happening? So last autumn, at the time of the mini-budget, when Prime Minister Truss, Chancellor Kwarteng, they came out with their plans, they hadn't showed them to the Office for Budget Responsibility, they hadn't shared them with the Bank of England, all the establishment was pretty miffed with these renegade leaders, and they started talking down the British economy. The Bank of England started selling bonds into the market, making life more difficult for the government, and what we call the gilt yield, the amount of money the government must pay to borrow on international markets shot up to 4.63%, Nigel, at its peak. Well, today, when I just checked, it was 4.9%. So financial markets think that the finances of this country are more rickety now than they were at the time of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng.
The globalist elites, and the IMF and Joe Biden's White House, I mean, the headlines, and now it's difficult to get this story out on British television.
It is, and I think only you and I and Jacob Rees-Mogg and I were discussing it last night as well. Look at where we are. The Bank of England is going to come in for a world of criticism over the next few days. Why? Because in America, inflation is 4%, Nigel. It's down at 4%. And the Federal Reserve's just taken a month off from raising interest rates.
And we will get our inflation figures next week.
We get our inflation figures next week. They're likely to be, well, at 8.7% now, and we are definitely going to see an interest rate rise. Even the ECB inflation in the Eurozone is 6.1%, a lot less than it is here. And this is the problem. You have all this arcane talk about gilt yields and inflation rates and all the rest of it.
But the reality
is it's hitting the mortgage market.
And there are lots of people...
About 120,000 people a month. They're coming off fixed-rate deals, and those fixed-rate deals they got 2, 3, 5 years ago when interest rates were ultra low. They're now facing interest rates of 5, 6% and more. A massive increase. Young family with a mortgage, with kids, with childcare costs. I don't want to spread alarm, but we have to start thinking and talking about this.
I'm afraid we're going to be back to house repossessions and many unpleasant things. And the effective cost of living in a house now with a mortgage, property prices may have fallen a bit, but the effective cost of living in a house on borrowed money is going through the roof.
It is indeed, and it's not just people with mortgages, it's people, you know, if you are lucky enough to own a house, fair enough, a lot of us don't these days. People with personal debts, a lot of those are on variable rates too. But, you know, I often get emails from GB News viewers, listeners, Telegraph readers of my column, and they say, oh, back in my day we had interest rates 13, 14, 15%. What are these young people worrying about? They should eat fewer avocado sandwiches. They should go to Ibiza a bit less. But guess what, Nigel? Today's young people paid a lot more for their houses as a percentage of their annual incomes.
Absolutely.
Houses are now 8.5, 9 times average incomes. So the amount of money people are spending on their rent, spending on their mortgages, today's 25 to 34-year-olds, higher than any generation since the 1930s.
Badly delivered, too much at once, but very quickly. Was Liz Truss on the right track?
She was on the right track, but she made some elementary errors. A bit like Boris, really. So much potential. And what she was trying to do wasn't radical. She was trying to get the top rate of tax back to where it was under Tony Blair. She was trying to get the economy, tax as a share of GDP, 1 percentage point lower, back where it was in 2019.
And look how they treated her. Well, what better evening could there be than for Liz Truss herself to join GB News with Dan Wootton with a live audience. And it'll be a 2-hour show from 9 to 11 tonight, and it's going to take place in Lee, just outside Manchester, and Dan Wootton is going to tell us all about it.
Nigel, fascinating discussion. I think you're completely right. Personally, I believe Truss-onomics has been vindicated. And this is actually, unbelievably, the first major, or the first broadcast TV appearance at all, actually, from Liz Truss since she was forced out of Downing Street in those extraordinary circumstances last year. And what's great tonight, Nigel, is it's the GB News viewers who get to ask her the question. So, of course, we're going to be talking about the economy. Was she right? How can Sunak cut taxes before the next election and avoid what she had to went through in terms of that fight against the economic establishment? But also, there's lots else to discuss. Obviously, Boris Johnson. She was very supportive of him. How does she feel about the Privileges Committee today? Stopping the boats. Is there a Truss way to do that before the next election? The culture war, the media, the blob. I think what's really interesting, Nigel, and you know a little bit about this from your own discussions with her as well. You know, Liz Truss is not defeated in terms of speaking out. She has big plans. This is going to be just the beginning. And she wants to return the Conservative Party to those tax-cutting routes. So I think today is the start of the fight back. It's obviously a fascinating time for the Conservative Party in the midst of a civil war. And if they thought that they had defeated and got rid of the last 2 prime ministers in terms of shutting up, I think Sunak and his mates like Jeremy Hunt have another thing coming.
Dan, thanks very much. Looking forward to it very much indeed. A quick What the Farage moment. One car company appears to actually have some common sense, and it's Toyota. They are not pretending that we can move completely to electric vehicles quickly and that the whole thing will be easy and pain-free. No, in fact, they're very, very sceptical about electric cars. Sceptical that overall they'll reduce carbon emissions. Why? Well, because number one, we have to produce the electricity in some way, and number two, we're going to have to open up mines all over the world for the minerals needed to build the enormous car batteries and the cost of them. Toyota have described them. Cars could become like flowers on a high summit. Namely, electric vehicles, for many people, are totally and utterly unaffordable. Now, this is a very different Conservative Party to the old one. The old one was very much of the shires, hunting, shooting, fishing. Not this one. Good Lord, no. Not with Carrie Johnson and the Goldsmiths. No, this one put in its 2019 manifesto that it would ban trophy hunting, ban people bringing back trophies of things they'd caught or shot overseas. And it's getting pretty close to being legislation. We'll debate with two passionate people arguing on both sides of the argument. We'll debate in a moment. Is that good or is it bad for conservation in Africa?
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant the Big Green, my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So the legislation, and it was promised in the 2019 Conservative manifesto, but it's going through on a private member's bill. Henry Smith is the Member of Parliament, Conservative member for Crawley, and he is pushing this legislation. And what it would do is stop the import of up to about 7,000 creatures, and you can think of, elephants or perhaps marlin heads, but it even goes down to things like corals that we would not be allowed to bring back into this country. Some of it seems, fits in with European Union regulations on all of this. I've never really heard the arguments, Henry Smith, as to what banning trophy hunting would do. What would the positives, what would the upsides of banning trophy hunting be?
Well, the species you mention and what the bill sets out is it would ban the importation of body parts that have been hunted from endangered species. So we're talking about elephants, for example, but not just African animals like lions as well, but also polar bears too, and as you say, many other species that are endangered. So it would ban people from bringing back those body parts of endangered species that they have killed abroad.
And you're suggesting that all the 7,000 species mentioned in this legislation are all endangered?
They are the legislation states those that are on the CITES, that's the international organization that determines whether a species is endangered or not. And sadly, many species are endangered and threatened with extinction. So it is that list that is internationally outlined. And incidentally, just in terms of your introduction, this is not European Union driven. Like you, I was a proud supporter of Brexit and the UK leaving the UK. This would go much further than legislation in the European Union.
In your own private member's bill, it does mention a series of EC regulations, but let's not get bogged down on that. So look, just quickly, it's okay then for people from overseas to come here and shoot red deer, for those deer heads to be mounted, so we'll go on exporting trophies, but not importing any. I think that's the argument. I'm going to bring in Professor Amy Dickman, Director of the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit. Amy, people in Botswana tell me that actually trophy hunting, done properly, taking out aging or sick animals, or even animals that might now be a danger to people living there, could actually, given the money that people pay to do it, could actually be a good thing for conservation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, it's really good that Henry Smith and others are concerned about conservation, but it's fundamentally important that we actually tailor legislation towards addressing the threats of endangerment. So yes, lots of species on that list, those 7,000, are threatened with extinction, but none of them are threatened with extinction because of trophy hunting. More of those animals are actually brought into the UK for the pet trade, for example, than for trophy hunting. So while this promises that, to the UK public that this would protect around 7,000 species, there is no way that I can see that banning trophy imports from those species, as you said, around a third of these species on this list are coral. There's lots of butterflies, insects, there's even species that are already endangered. So not one of those species is threatened with extinction by trophy hunting. Actually, the main threats to species are things like habitat loss and poaching. And as you mentioned, from places like Botswana, the revenue that comes in from trophy hunting, just like with phototourism, can help fund the maintenance of huge areas, more land in Africa that is maintained under national parks, and fund things like anti-poaching. So it actually helps counterintuitively reduce those far greater threats to species. And we should be looking at evidence-led legislation, not driven by misinformation and what offends people on social media.
It's quite powerful, Henry, isn't it? When you listen to people in Botswana, Namibia, countries like this where people do go to shoot, and the argument, they argue very powerfully that actually controlled culling of herds can lead to healthier herds, and given that wealthy German, British, American people will pay, really very big sums of money to go and shoot these animals, that money can be used to combat poaching and other things that really do endanger these species. Surely you must see there is an argument for trophy hunting.
Very, very little of that money goes to local communities. A lot of it goes to as backhanders to government officials. in countries to keep operating this system. And actually, if you look at countries like Kenya, where they banned trophy hunting in the 1970s, their conservation is far in advance of those countries that haven't. And I would argue that shooting an animal several hundred times with a camera is far more lucrative for local communities than shooting an animal once and then that animal is dead. I find it very odd indeed that there is an argument that to protect an endangered species, shooting it is the best way to do that. And it's worse than that, because the trophy hunters go for the most prized animals, so the big tusk elephants. So they actually deplete the gene pool of those species, which means
I think, Henry, I think you'll find that on properly managed shoots, that the hunters will be told which animals they're allowed to shoot, and that'll be done because, and I'm going to repeat this point, that actually taking out older or sick animals can actually. I mean, I live in Kent.
They're not
I live in
taking
Kent.
out
We've
the
got a
older and
huge
sick
deer
animals.
herd
They're
there.
taking out
It needs
the prized
culling.
ones, the lions with the biggest manes, the elephants with the largest tusks, and that is depleting the gene pool and further threatening those species. And I'd just like to say that this bill is about what we choose to import into this country. This bill isn't telling African countries what to do. It's not telling Canada what to do in terms of polar bears, which is also on the CITES endangered species list, or any of those other species from around the world. It is saying, and 9 out of 10 people in many public surveys don't want trophy hunting imported into this country. It is saying that we choose in Great Britain not to have the body parts of endangered species traded into this country. That is the territorial extent of this bill. That
but in effect,
whatever my personal opinions might be on hunting endangered species.
In effect, you are taking money out of Africa. Sorry, please, Amy.
Yeah, I mean, this idea that 9 out of 10 people support it, that largely came from lobby group polls. Actually, fewer than half of Britons want import bans if it would harm conservation and local livelihoods. And this ban, as set out right now, would do both those things. It doesn't address the key threats to species endangerment. The thing that we and over 200 other experts are asking for now is a conservation amendment on this bill to say, maybe Henry's right, maybe it doesn't benefit conservation and communities, but if there are places where it does, and I think there are compelling examples, black rhino, white rhino, many places where it actually benefits both conservation and livelihoods, then that should not be undermined by us. People want effective conservation. That's what we should be delivering, not driven by this kind of misinformation and clickbait headlines.
Yeah, and of course, gesture politics. You know, this is all very popular, isn't it? In amongst the metropolitan elites of London. I'm not sure, Henry, it's a really burning issue.
Nigel, I
with
don't
your
come
constituents
from
in Crawley.
I've never lived in London. I come from what I would consider is pretty representative Britain. A swing seat always has been in this country, and it obviously issues like making sure that we get the economy right, cost of living, things like that are the priority. But I receive a lot of support from constituents out in real Britain. You've been to my constituency, Nigel, several months ago, and it is real people who support this. It's saying that we choose not to want to import those killed body parts of endangered species into this country. It's not telling other countries what to do. And I would argue
this agenda, Henry, this agenda was driven.
Other parts of the world were Europeans when they were colonising those countries.
This was driven by Carrie Johnson and the Goldsmiths, the ultimate London elite. I will give the final word to Professor Amy Dickman. Amy, this goes to the House of Lords. I was told by a couple of peers last week that there will be some amendments put down. Are you hopeful that they might get through?
Well, it depends. I really hope for the sake of really effective conservation and equitable conservation that they do. I think this idea of, colonialism, there have been many government representatives that have actually complained to the government saying this feels like the UK imposing their views again, despite the fact those other countries have far better conservation records than the UK does. And as you point out, the UK does trophy hunting at home. If this is about conservation, not the morality of trophy hunting, then it should be about addressing the major threats to conservation, and trophy hunting does not threaten a single species of extinction, and things like habitat loss, which this bill would increase, will do so.
Henry Smith, Amy Dickman, thank you very much indeed for joining me in that debate. And folks at home, I genuinely care about conservation, and I think hunting and shooting managed properly can be a good thing. Right, time for Barrage the Farage. Ade in London has a question for me.
All right, Nigel. My name is Ade. My question for you is, should Boris Johnson go to work in the European Union?
Well, I don't think he'd be very popular. He did, of course, work in the European Union. He was a columnist for the Daily Telegraph about 30 years ago and wrote some very amusing copy. Not all of it was true, but it was always very, very amusing. Don't see Boris going to work in the European Union. Can see Boris Johnson spending time in America. I think that's far, far more likely. Another question for me. T from London.
Hi, my name's T. Hi, Nigel Farage. My question is to you, what can you do for the UK?
Oh, goodness gracious me. What can I do for the UK? Well, I did spend a long time campaigning for the UK to be independent, and I thought that was something that rather mattered. I felt that was something that those that went before us had built, an independent country, really created the concept of parliamentary democracy, of self-government. We believed in that concept of sovereignty so much. We even went to war, 2 huge wars in the last century, to defend that principle, not just for us, but for the rest of Europe too. After that, it's about what we do with that independence, and that's where the current argument lies, that we haven't yet done quite enough with it, and there are some disappointments. Now, coming up is State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. Interesting debate there on trophy hunting. Extraordinary, isn't it, that the Conservative manifesto was to ban trophy hunting?
Indeed, it was a manifesto commitment. Yeah. And the problem with these arguments, as you were discussing, is they're actually much more nuanced. Yeah. It's not trophy hunting bad. There are all sorts of conservation issues that surround it, and therefore the simplistic populist answer sometimes isn't the right one.
No, I agree. What have you got coming up tonight, Jacob?
Well, I think you might guess that we're going to be talking about the Privileges Committee, yes. Boris Johnson, yes. The extraordinary 90-day suspension.
That was vindictive and nasty.
Indeed,
yes,
that's right. And I think they've overplayed their hand. I think if they'd gone for a 15-day suspension and they had accepted what he said on some of the things, because some of the charges against him I don't think stand up very strongly. If they'd been more moderate, then I think their report would be more believable, would carry more weight. And in fact, they've been so extreme and vindictive.
However, now, look, I think, the removal of the pass, all of those things there's a bit of Remainers' revenge from some people, and I get that. Although, there were 4 Conservative members of Parliament on that committee.
Yes, there were, but House of Commons committees are so much led by the chairman. The chairman provides the first draft report, and the chairman appoints the advisers.
Do you mean these MPs haven't got minds of their own?
The chairman is an MP.
I know, but I meant the others.
Yeah, the main bulk of the report will be the chairman's report that they have then accepted. It may get tweaked as it goes through the process. And, of course, the chairman, Harriet Harman, expressed her views in some tweets before she was appointed.
The others could always have resigned if they chose not to. Lots more to debate, but let's have a look first at the weather.
Evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather for GB News from the Met Office. Another fine, sunny one for most on Friday, and again pretty warm, but an increasing chance of seeing some more thunderstorms. Any storms this evening over the west of Northern Ireland tending to drift away. Most will have a dry night with lengthy clear spells, a bit misty around the coast of northwest Scotland. Later in the night, the cloud increasing, the possibility of some showers in the far southwest. But for most, as I said, dry and clear, pretty warm and humid in the west, but cooler across the northeast. Temperatures, rural parts of Scotland, well down into single figures. So a coolish start here, but for most, it will be, again, a warm day on Friday. For the vast majority, another blue sky day as well. But